Now, when Donald Trump returned to office, he promised to be the president of peace and that he would end wars in record time. But in a new statement, the US president said he's changed course after failing to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And he doubled down on his desire to control Greenland. EU leaders have accused Washington of extortion for threatening tariffs against countries that oppose the US takeover of this semi-autonomous Danish territory. So how did we get here? Here's a look back at 12 months of Trump deal making and breaking.
This is Donald Trump on the campaign trail 2 years ago.
When I'm back in the White House, we will expel the warmongers, the profiteers, and take over our government, and we will restore world peace.
This is him last October.
But the 8 wars that my administration has ended in just 8 months, there's never been anything like that. Never. There never will be either.
After years of complaining that he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, Trump has now lashed out at Norway's prime minister, saying in a letter, "I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America." So what about those 8 wars Trump says he stopped? They range from the conflict in Gaza to wars you've never heard of because they never broke out. In Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza, Trump pushed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas to make a deal, earning praise for engaging with Hamas and for putting more pressure on Netanyahu than many expected. However, even after the deal, Israel has continued its airstrikes and accuses Hamas of violating the ceasefire. Israel and Iran had a 12-day war in June that ended after Trump ordered U.S. bombers to hit Iran's nuclear facilities. A ceasefire mediated by the U.S. and Qatar followed. The India-Pakistan border saw 4 days of fighting that ended, Trump claimed, after an all-night bargaining session. However, India claims it was solved through normal channels. Some ceasefires have been shaky. Decades of conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia over a contested region seemed to end in a deal brokered by Trump in Washington, with the leaders of both countries present. They still haven't ratified the deal, however. The leaders of Rwanda and Democratic Republic of Congo came to Washington to sign an agreement in principle to stop fighting, but that ceasefire has been violated multiple times. And a long-simmering border dispute between Cambodia and Thailand erupted in 2025, yet another ceasefire Trump claimed credit for, that has been broken since. Was everything Trump claimed was a war actually a war? He claimed credit for heading off conflict between Serbia and Kosovo before shots were fired. Also, a dispute between Egypt and Ethiopia over a Nile River dam ended before it started. A mixed bag of triumphs and conflicts that have been solved, sort of. One major piece of unfinished business. Trump promised to solve the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. But the war shows no signs of letting up, despite a high-profile summit between Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in August 2025. Trump has also largely ignored the civil war in Sudan, where a genocidal conflict is still happening. Meanwhile, the U.S. has acted aggressively in its own backyard, launching a military raid on Venezuela and seizing its president, Nicolas Maduro. Now Trump has threatened Colombia and Cuba with similar treatment if they don't do what he says. Trump has threatened to attack Iran again, this time for its brutal repression of domestic protests. If that happens, Iran could counterattack and create a real war. But for U.S. allies, it's Trump's fixation on taking control of Greenland from fellow NATO member Denmark that's most shocking. Seizing the island could break up NATO, a long-term goal of Russia and China. Treating friends like enemies and giving U.S. rivals what they want. A price Trump seems willing to pay to satisfy his desire for more territory.
Let's pick up some of the matters arising out of that last point with Jeppe Kofod. Jeppe served as Danish foreign minister from 2019 to 2022. He's now CEO of consulting company Kofod Global and joins us from Copenhagen. Welcome to DW. So you were Danish foreign minister the first time Donald Trump tried to buy Greenland. How did you calm things down back then?
Well, it was, of course, a shock at the time, we have to remember. And he described it, President Trump, as a big real estate deal. With his background, it was the terminology he used. But what happened then was actually that I, together with Greenland and our American counterparts, the Secretary of State at the time, Mike Pompeo, the National Security Advisor in the White House, we worked closely together, and we found another way where U.S. cooperation with Greenland increased to the benefit of Greenlandic people, to the benefit of the United States, and with big pressure of Denmark. So it led to reopening of the U.S. consulate in Nuuk. In 2020, there was economic cooperation agreement between the United States and Greenland on tourism, education, and so on. All of that was really good. So something that started as a conflict ended as a closer cooperation, which we all were very happy about.
Okay, so effectively you gave them what they wanted, and they said, "Fine, we'll have that." But now he's come back. What do you think is different this time?
Yeah, you have to remember this time President Trump insists to take Greenland, to control Greenland, to make Greenland American. And that is, of course, totally unacceptable. Greenland is its own country, its own nation, its own people. And they have, like any other nation, a democratic right to decide their own future. Greenland, Kingdom of Denmark, is part of NATO. We were founding partners of NATO with the United States. We have stand side by side in the Arctic, in Greenland. We have had a defense agreement since 1951 where US can have bases and troops in Greenland. And we recognize together the importance of Greenland for the North American defense and the Arctic security. So that we want to work with the United States on, and Denmark has in recent years put more troops in Greenland, more military assets. Okay. And alongside other NATO countries, we are, as we speak, deploying much more assets to the high north and Greenland. While US in the last decades has really, really scaled back. I mean, when there was most troops and soldiers, military staff from US, there was around 10,000 in the high days of the Cold War, maybe 15 to 17 bases in Greenland, US bases. Now they're down to one military base, Peter Space Base, and only 150 troops. So US has not prioritized to put more troops in Greenland.
So this time, you've again given the United States what they say they wanted, and it still appears not to be enough. So what happens? What does Greenland, what does Denmark do if the talking and the negotiating doesn't work and Donald Trump does a Venezuela?
Well, I think that will de facto end NATO as an alliance. If one NATO country, United States, against the will of another NATO state, Kingdom of Denmark, Greenland, take Greenland with force and without any respect for territorial integrity or sovereignty of Greenland. That will be the end of NATO, and it will lead to open conflict over the Atlantic between all of Europe and United States, and also United States and most of the rest of the world. And I also want to say that this will be self-inflicting damage to United States' core interest, because United States' core interest is a well-functioning NATO. It is to work with Denmark and Greenland on security in the Arctic, with Norway, with Canada, the other NATO Arctic states. Okay. So this will be a big blow.
So you've described a catastrophic end, and we all hope that this will not happen. But here's my question. That catastrophe that you describe, if Trump goes the way that he has gone elsewhere, is Greenland really worth it?
It's both. Greenland is really worth it because Greenland is nation, people, and country that have their own rights. And it's unbelievable in the 21st century that a democratic country with its own rights, territorial integrity, and sovereignty will be utterly disrespected and overruled by another democratic country in the same alliance. So yes, it would be worse to fight back that idea until it's dead and buried. And At the same time, Greenland and Denmark and the rest of Europe is insisting we want to work with the United States. We want to address the issues together. We want to deploy troops together. We invited the United States to bring more troops to Greenland. So the only one who will start a conflict is not us, it's President Trump. If he wants to end the conflict today, he could just announce that, well, yeah, let's work together and we can secure the Arctic region like we've done for decades.
Here's the thing about that answer. I'm sorry to cut you off, but time is short. Here's the thing about that. Here's the thing about that answer. You say that it's important that territorial sovereignty be respected and that he respects Greenland and he respects Danish sovereignty. Greenlanders don't want to be Americans, but they don't want to be Danes either. Isn't it hypocritical to reject American colonial claims while clinging to your own?
No, because we have legislation from 2009 that gives the sole right to the Greenlandic people to design their own future. If they want to be independent of Denmark, they can do it. They have the right to do it, and they will be fully respected by Denmark. So the future of Greenland is not decided in Washington or in Copenhagen. It's decided in Nuuk. And we all stand behind Greenlandic people and the Greenlandic nation or any threats or cohesion that we are seeing at the moment. And we are also standing behind the principles that has brought peace across the Atlantic for many, many decades and made NATO the most successful military alliance maybe in history.
Good talking to you. Thanks for joining us, former Danish Foreign Minister Jeppe Kofod.
You're welcome.